Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event on how to power the business ecosystem through secure access. Today's webinar is sponsored by Access Security and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to your questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There's a link to a free Access Security trial. There are also links to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, which is Actual Tech Media's collection of great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Events Center, where you can find more events like this one. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. And we recognize that some of you work for organizations that don't allow you to accept prizes. If that's the case for you, or if you want to donate the value of the gift card, we work with several great charitable organizations. So thanks to generous prize winners on previous ATM events, thousands of dollars have been donated to those organizations. So thanks in advance if you make that choice today. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. And finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Christopher Hines, Vice President of Product Marketing at Access Security, and Rotem Lurie, who's Director of Product Management at Access Security. Chris, welcome and take it away.
Hey, Scott, thanks for the invite today. It's always great to be able to get a chance to speak with you all at Actual Tech Media, and hello to the entire audience. Chris Hines, VP Product Marketing here at Access, and I'm joined today with my awesome co-presenter, Rotem. You want to say hey?
Hey, thank you, Chris. Hey, everyone. My name is Rotem. I'm the Director of Product Management here at Access Security, and I'm super excited to be here with you guys today.
Great, thank you. So today's subject is going to be a really interesting one. We're going to be talking about how you can use this notion of the security services edge, which is a kind of new evolving space here within the market, as a means of helping your business ecosystem securely access your business data. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means from a business ecosystem perspective, who are some of the key counterparts there. But first, we want to get the blood really jumping here and actually start off with a poll question. So the question is, what percentage of your business is third-party users? Again, this includes suppliers, vendors, B2B customers, etc. So if you can please fill in one of those boxes and we will go ahead and take a look at the results, and let's give it like 10 or so seconds. Really interested to see what this looks like right now. I see typically we find that our customers have around 30, maybe one out of every 3%. One of every three have some kind of third-party user, so about 33%. We'll see what that number looks like in just a couple seconds. All right, let's go ahead and look at some of those results. Interesting. Okay, this is about in line with what we see with our customer base as well. We see about 41% have between 1 and 25% are third-party users. About a quarter of you 26 to 50%, and a fifth of you have between 50 and 75% of your users are third party. Okay, this is awesome to see. Obviously, you've come to the right presentation today. So thanks for filling that in, and we'll probably have another poll question later on. So first off, just want to kind of get into this notion of what do we mean by third parties? Obviously, employees working from anywhere has been one of the biggest focus areas over the last, especially 2 years or so. Can't believe it's already been almost 2 years here from a COVID perspective. But there's also the third-party aspect, the folks who maybe don't belong to your business but still need access to your private applications, maybe in some cases your SaaS-based applications as well. And we define those kind of in like three areas. The first are your contractors. So maybe if you're a healthcare organization, maybe there's the doctors or nurses who might be working within the hospital, but don't necessarily belong to the actual hospital themselves from a hiring perspective. That could be maybe part-time employees who have badges to get into your building, but aren't necessarily full-time employees themselves. The second one are this notion of your OT partners. So OT, you're going to hear that term and that phrase mentioned a few times here within the call, within the webisode, is this notion of operational technology. So these are third-party vendors that you're allowing to, maybe through a VPN or VDI, connect in some of your critical infrastructure to manage that infrastructure on your behalf. And the third component are your B2B ecosystem players. So these are maybe your B2B customers who you need to allow to gain access to your web-based portals. Those could be suppliers who need access to your inventory management applications to either create new orders or cancel orders themselves. So that's kind of where we're looking at from a business ecosystem perspective there. Now, it's not always the easiest thing to actually do in terms of enabling that access. There are some obviously very real challenges associated with that. One of the biggest components are the fact that these are folks that are coming from obviously third parties, and you don't necessarily have control over their security hygiene. So if you don't control them in terms of their device they're connecting from, it's often difficult to determine what applications they have access to, but also having to place them onto the corporate network via maybe a VPN or VDI is extremely risky. And we're actually starting to see threat adversaries take advantage of that risk, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But again, what we're looking to do here in this new workspace is trying to find areas and ways to reduce the overall attack surface. So decoupling application access from network access is actually really difficult to do in many cases from a third-party access perspective. And then lastly, understanding exactly what that third party is doing. Well, not just what applications are they accessing, but what files are they downloading? What protocols are they using? What commands are they using? So having more granular visibility into what it looks like is very important, not just looking at them as a username and host name or source IP, destination IP, which is how some of the traditional access solutions work. So we're going to think about and talk a little bit more about kind of what the future of access looks like. Now, there's this notion out there called the security services edge. So that'll be another component that you hear quite a bit about today on the call. This is a set of integrated, really cloud-based technologies that are used to use identity and policy to enable an individual to securely access a resource. That individual could be an employee, it could be a third-party user as well. So we'll talk about some of the functions that kind of operate within that, but the general idea here is to be able to manage all this from a single pane of glass, right? And this isn't marketing buzzword or anything like that, but literally the ability to manage all applications, devices, whether those applications are SaaS-based, private applications as well, from a single interface, which is often a challenge that we've seen within the market with some of the other vendors that are out there. But the general notion here is, instead of allowing connectivity to just naturally take place, we're going to mediate the connection. So the traffic is forwarded either from the client or even agentless as well from the user's device to the cloud service. The cloud service then does a couple different things. It's checking for the authentication through integrations with IDP. It could even look at leveraging certain criteria like device posture, and is making enforcement calls based on the policy that the customer has set. So you have this really nice combination of authentication and authorization. If an individual is allowed to access the application, and again, context is very important there, who they are, the device they're connecting from, the health of that device, the particular application, the type of content, or all, even location for many, are part of that contextual criterion that is used to determine whether or not a user should get access. Now, once that takes place, the actual brokering takes place. So let's say if you're looking at a third party who's trying to access maybe a web application that's running on AWS, the way it will work is you have this notion of an app connector, right? The app connector is sitting in front of the application and is sending inside out connections to the cloud service. This is very different from the way that something like a VPN or VDI would function. There's no semblance or idea of inbound connectivity. There's no need for network access here. We're not having to expose the VPN or VDN or VDI or any of the infrastructure to the open internet, right? I kind of always joke around. It's almost like dating, right? It's like, I'll call you, you don't call me. And that's the same way that we're treating these applications. The other key component that's taking place here is this notion of, since we sit in line, there's the inspection capability that's realized, where we can look at not just, again, the activity but files downloaded, the commands that are used, but also look at changes in the individual's posture, where maybe they're connecting from a different IP address, or maybe their device health or device posture has changed. We're able to automatically sever that access based on the changes in that context. If you think about the problems we just outlined on the third party perspective, all those become really, really important when you think about connecting a third party to one of your business resources. But Riten, maybe you can talk to us a little bit more about some of the capabilities that companies should look for when looking at some of these technologies.
Yeah, definitely. So Access being a single pane of glass that consolidates all access types makes it the only platform that gives you full visibility to your user's journey across all applications. So just please help me with the clicks here, Chris. But with the full, thank you. With the full context of what your users were actually doing in both private and public applications. So it's fairly easy, for instance, like we see here, to identify files that being downloaded from your private network, for instance, and uploaded to a file sharing, public file sharing, for instance. So it contains a super simple to use end user portal. One more click, please. Thank you. Real-time application and user insights, and we are the only ones again that are doing this full termination to gives you full visibility to what your users are actually doing within the applications, and not only the fact that they connected to it. And also one more click, please. There you go. I think now I got this. And with our clientless and client-based access, we can give you full visibility to the actual SSH commands that users are doing, to the fact that they've been downloading files from private Windows applications within your private networks and then uploading them all the way to their Dropbox private account. Access being single pane of glass for all access types is what gives us the ability to do this magic and to give you the full context of your full user journey.
Awesome. So we talked about the architecture, we talked about some of the capabilities. Now it's, how do we actually realize this? How do we generate value for the actual business? And that obviously comes down to individual use cases. And the three use cases that Rotem and I will cover today are A, contractor access, B, partner access to operational technology, which is going to be a really hot subject based on the fact that a lot of this critical infrastructure and operational technologies are actually becoming more of a target for ransomware. And then lastly, one of the components that a lot of people don't often think about are actually B2B customers and suppliers. So how do you help connect the business to the supply chain, which is incredibly important for productivity, for competitive differentiation, and of course, for driving revenue for the business itself. So if we kind of get into this first, we wanted to get a sense here in the audience in terms of what's the top use case when you think about third parties that you would want to think through, right? So if you can check one of the three, either contractor access, partner access to OT, or B2B customer access, that will be greatly appreciated. And in about 15 seconds, we'll take a look at that use case and see how this actually breaks down. This is the first time I think there's ever been a public ask on the market around what use case is most important from a third-party access perspective. So you all are making part of history today, which is awesome. I'll give it about 5 more seconds, and then we'll close this down and take a look at what the top use case is. And it's actually, just sneak peek here, it's actually pretty close there. So if we'll stop the voting, look at that breakdown. So what use case resonates with you the most? The winner here with 10 votes was B2B customer access. Okay, this is really, really good to see. So we'll definitely make sure we spend some good amount of time there. And second place with 9 votes, contractor access. And in third place, partner access to operational technology. All right, this is a really, really good balanced audience here. So helps the conversation going forward. Thank you for the participation, and on to the next. Okay, so the first use case, contractor access, kind of interesting stats here that we're seeing. When you think about just the longevity of time that the average contractor employee works, is actually not long at all, about 2.5 months. So if you're constantly having to set policies, define user groups, manage the overall life cycle of that individual, it can become very cumbersome. In many cases, we'll find that customers who are using traditional technologies will often have situations where maybe the partner or the contractor is no longer part of the organization, but they still have access to a particular application because maybe the timeout for the IDP was 30 days and it had just reset a couple of days before. So now you have 28 days of time where that contractor who's no longer really associated with the business still has access to those applications. So this is a really important use case that we're looking to kind of solve here. It's, I would say, from our perspective, one of the more prevalent ones when we hear about and when our customers ask us about third-party access. So, Tim, if you can kind of help us understand, how would you look to use a security service edge technology to help overcome this need for contractor access?
Yeah, sure. So how it works with access is that once a contractor, for instance, requests access to the application, and this can be with the agent or without it, access mediates the request and evaluates the policy. That means that access assures that the user has properly authenticated with your IDP. We verify the fact that they've properly passed the MFA, and we also check for additional criteria as per what you've configured in your policy. That can be the device health, or even check with the possible EDR integrations that we have that the device is indeed healthy and adheres to your organization's policy. Now, in case that the policy evaluation have passed, Access will broker the traffic, and together with the Access connectors here on top, leveraging their only outbound connectivity to the Access cloud, Access connects the user to the applications while keeping them outside of the network. So they only get access to what they need, and they cannot laterally move within your network and get access to additional assets as well. Access continuously streams all of the activity logs, everything that the users are doing to your SIM, and also continuously enforces the policy. So if anything gets changed, either in the session user context or in the policy configurations itself, as long as the connection won't adhere to the policy, it will be terminated and the user won't be able to connect to the application anymore. Continuous enforcement takes all policy components under consideration, including scheme updates and posture changes.
Awesome. So some of the things that often customers will ask about would be like, well, does it require agent? Can you go agentless? And one of the things that you should always look for when you're looking at an SSE service is support for both agentless and agent-based. Now, from a contractor perspective, it could be a good idea to force them to deploy some kind of agent, in which case you would be able to leverage things like device posture and integrations with CrowdStrike. You'd be able to determine and secure access to more thick client applications or traditional applications that are not communicating over HTTP or HTTPS, but the web-based applications or RDP, SSH, Git, and databases can all be accessed through agentless as well. So if agentless is a better method for you for your contractors, of course, that's something you can think through leveraging in addition to it. The second use case that we'll talk through, and this is actually one of the hottest and kind of fastest growing ones. I was actually just reading an article before this presentation where was just looking at how the Maryland Health Department had basically come forward and said that their attack based in December was actually a ransomware attack on some of their critical infrastructure, where actually helped shut down much of their infrastructure. Now, obviously, there's been several high-profile examples of adversaries going after critical infrastructure, and the reason is because almost all the time you have some kind of third-party vendor who needs to troubleshoot an application or needs to update something in an application. Like, let's say we've worked with an oil and gas company. I won't share the name, but basically they sell goods to companies like Shell or British Petroleum. So those are essentially their partners, but they also have a computer numerical system that is managed by a third-party vendor. So that vendor would need to access through typically a VPN. They'd have to manage the life cycles for that. There's this obviously sense of inherent trust where you're placing that individual onto the corporate network. And with OT networks, they're relatively flat, right? Because you have the IT organization who's managing your traditional IT network, but they're also managing your OT component. So very little segmentation in it, even today from a network segmentation perspective. So this becomes obviously a super attractive place for a threat actor to take advantage of, given the lack of segmentation, inherent trust, and critical infrastructure is a great way to just get the attention of an organization, especially if you're looking to deploy ransomware. Most companies and most organizations, whether private or public, will be more likely and willing to pay a ransom to unlock their data from a critical infrastructure perspective than probably any other resource for the business itself. So if you think about the way that different ships are managed, there's organizations out there who, like Man Energy Solutions, who have ships off the coast of Copenhagen, who leverage technologies like this, like deploy the connector on a satellite and allow that third-party vendor to securely access a ship manifest and the engine running there to make sure that the engine is running properly. Or maybe if there's factory situations where there's some organizations who are running experiments and the temperature gauges and controls of the environment there is managed by a third party. So imagine if someone was able to get access to that critical infrastructure, shut off the AC or the air conditioning or the heating, that would obviously damage all the different experiments that they're running as well. Obviously, you could think through what that would be like from a train perspective, satellites, etc. And for some of the high-profile examples, I think Colonial Pipeline stands out to many. I'm sure a lot of you are like, oh yeah, we've seen this example talked about a million times. This is just for those of you who are a little bit less familiar with it, the timeline that took place here. And what we're finding is that a lot of the challenges are associated with the VPN being the component that's creating the exposure. Again, inbound pings from a VPN concentrator can be found by a remote operational technology manager, but that ping can also be found by a adversary who can port scan for VPN servers with outdated postures, use that as an entry point to gain domain access, steal usernames and passwords, and then log in as if they're a legitimate user. And at that point, they run Nmap, which maps out the entire environment from a network perspective, and they can start deploying the ransomware or sophisticated threat. That's where a lot of these malware and ransomware threats take place. And of course, what happens once the ransomware propagates, the ransom is actually communicated to the customer. In Canada, it's actually quite interesting. Over half of the ransomware attacks they see are actually going after critical infrastructure. And so kind of an interesting stat that we're seeing here. Rotem, maybe if you can talk through some of the areas that a secure service edge service could help in the form of securing partner access to operational technology.
Sure. So, Chris, I think that one of the most scary things about the use case that we've been talking about right now is the fact that sometimes you have partners that are only working with one department, for instance, of your company, and you wouldn't like them to get access to the assets of other parts of your company. Here, for instance, we have this factory set of application here in the right. So, with Access, it's fairly easy to use our policy tagging mechanism. And with it, you can tag applications and segments just as you can do it with users. So it makes it super easy for an admin to decide which users can access which set of applications. Here, for instance, a preset group of particular employees working for a particular partner that are solely working with your factory will be able to get access only to the applications that tagged as factory application. To all of them, to some of them, it's really up to you. And I think that one more great thing that can help here is the fact that those partners will be getting a seamless remote experience, and they won't need access to your VPN or to your VDI, what leaves them completely outside of your network. And you as network admins will get full visibility to the actions that your partners are doing within your applications. One more great piece is Access multi-tenancy that allows you to manage access across different independent projects that, of course, can help you to implement the least privilege principle within your organization, assuring that always the partners are only getting access to the applications that they need to get access to. Partners can sometimes be remote, so do your factories. So with Access Private Edge, the user experience is improved, and it gives you minimum latency and maximum customability for the routing, as well as some advanced capabilities such as peer-to-peer connectivity and end-to-end encryption, just in case that those partners are working on a super sensitive project that you prefer it to be encrypted rather than visible to your SOC analysts to view.
That's awesome. And some of the interesting components that we're thinking through as well is even partnering with other organizations that are more focused on the actual uh, operational technology security itself. And so you have this notion of the access platform for securing either remote or on-prem access to a private application or the application that's required, but also being able to look at introducing zero trust within the actual configuration of the factory. Right? You have the water, you have the gas, you have the fire components that all need to be able to connect to each other throughout the system. So looking at segmentation from a user to application access perspective, to let's say a SCADA application that might be managed for, or HMI application, and also partnering with some of these network-based or OT-based zero trust companies to help segment the actual access between the different components that the SCADA application will be essentially correlating. So really interesting space and a great example of how to leverage zero trust to secure access for your OT users as well. Lastly is the B2B ecosystem. Now, 50% of you said that this was the primary use case that you're most interested in. So really excited to be able to get through this one and tell you about some of the interesting ways you can leverage SSE to secure access to it. So again, we're talking about suppliers, we're talking about B2B customers here. The difference between a contractor and OT vendor here versus a B2B customer or supplier is experience matters. Experience can be the difference between a customer selecting you over another organization. So it becomes a competitive aspect of it. Also, this is an area where companies often overspend because they have to deal with managing the identity profiles for a variety of different identities for every single one of their users. So it can actually become cost prohibitive in many cases. There's a lot of examples out there, and maybe some of you on the call or unfortunately have this situation as well, where you have these web-based portals where they're typically some kind of single sign-on and MFA integrated piece where a user can log in to a either partner or customer-facing portal that you offer to them. The reality is people can brute force attack those, they can DDoS those because they're reachable to the open internet. So finding ways to minimize their exposure to the internet is extremely important. I talked a little bit about the last point around this complexity of lifecycle management. It can take 2-3 weeks sometimes just to get a individual user from a B2B customer or supplier onboarded onto a platform, which is super, super challenging and obviously really frustrating for any IT manager who's trying to be able to move quickly as well. Now, the costs associated with that we talked through as well, having to manage multiple IDPs or buy licenses for Okta or Azure AD for all those individual users. It gets very expensive and costs add up quite quickly. So again, Rotem, you can maybe talk us through some of the B2B customer aspects here. And obviously we see this example here, the Lowe's portal. We don't mean to pick on anyone in particular, but it's just another example of a web-based portal that's openly exposed to the internet today.
Yeah, and I think that that this is really where the Access granular magic comes into action, because the product is so granular, and it's so easy to configure it and to make sure that you segment your network and user permissions in general. That it with minimum hassle, it gives you the ability to make a consumer-like applications for your customers. The product's granularity even allows you to adjust the appearance of the portal so that it will adhere to your branding. So it's fairly easy to create something that your consumers will be able to also connect to while making sure that your applications are still protected. And of course, the attack surface is minimized because those web apps will be protected by the Access cloud. Now, also the fact that Access can connect to multiple identity providers gives you the ability to work with multiple consumers and to protect one very same application that is connected by one or some of your customers. And for them, the user experience is pretty much transparent. They just get the additional layer of protection to themselves and to the applications. Now, again, all of the things that we've been talking about, this continuous enforcement for access, leveraging SCIM, and the EDR integrations where they are required, gives Access the ability to protect your users and your applications even more.
Yeah, and this is another great piece where that the agentless piece becomes important. Rotem and her team developed this notion called policy tagging, because one of the challenges that some customers would deal with from other SSE platforms were this notion of like app segmentation, which is often kind of very confusing, right? So maybe you start with discovering applications, but then let's say you discover 500 apps, now you have to define policies for each. And in some cases, it can get complex because let's say you have a third party and you have an individual, let's say an employee who needs access to the same application. In some cases, the way these other vendors work is a application can only be part of one specific application segment. So having to reference those becomes very complicated between a user and app and a third party user and an employee. So what we're saying here is create this notion of a policy tag, have multiple applications that fit within this policy tag. And when you set policies, you actually just reference the policy tag instead. So it's a way of just simplifying policy setup in a way that almost feels impossibly simple, which gets really important when you start scaling up your business across maybe thousands of employees, but tens of thousands in some cases of third parties who need access to that information as well. So thank you, Rotem, for walking us through that. Uh, we obviously seeing is believing, right? So we talk about a lot of interesting stuff today, but we do offer a free 14-day trial. If you're interested in trying it out, if you have a VPN use case, you have a third-party user group in mind that you want to start out with, you see the link there. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help out. We're evolving quickly. Rotem mentioned this notion of a private edge as well, which is something that we're really excited about what that looks like, because a lot of times, especially in the OT space, latency is everything, right? Trying to minimize latency on a network is important. So not just having the 350 edges that we have running in AWS and Google on their accelerated backbones, but having the ability to have that same brokering capability, so enforcement and inspection, as a virtual machine that's running locally on a bare metal server or on a private cloud, a virtualized environment, and doing that enforcement locally without having to go out to the internet is actually a great component from a speed, from a compliance perspective. If some companies out there aren't allowed to use cloud hosted security technologies, this is obviously an option you would look for. If there's certain budgetary constraints that you have around operational expenditures versus capex, in many cases you can classify the private edge as a capital expenditure, and again, there's several benefits associated with that as well. So it's a really interesting space to be in, and definitely the security service edge architecture and framework is perfectly outfitted for third-party access today. And with that being said, Scott, I think that's all Rotem and I had today. Rotem, any last thoughts?
No, I think you've wrapped it pretty well.
Okay,
Beautiful.
super.
Thank you, Scott. Over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks. I really appreciate the way you talked about the unique requirements of those three distinct use cases of, contractor access, partner access, and the B2B ecosystem. They have such different needs, and it was helpful to understand how access security addresses each one. A really nice presentation. We've got a lot of audience questions
Thanks, Scott.
here. Yeah, this first one is from Bradford, and it's the kind of thing that I would always ask as a technology journalist. So I'll start with that. Bradford says, "Indulge me. Is access security a phonetic respelling of access security? Is that what the source of the name is, or is it from something else?"
That's a really good question. And I can take that one, or if Rotem, you have an additional insight, please add it. But Axis, you think about the name Axis, it's the center point from which things rotate around. So that axis became a really important component, because as we look at this notion of a modern workplace, right, users connecting from anywhere or servers trying to connect to other clouds, being able to have some semblance of control over all that is the goal, right? The vision is really a world where the exchange of information is always seamless and secure. So that access component sounded really obviously important to us. Now, linguistically, access does sound very similar to access. So very good call out there. Kind of funny you mentioned it.
The next question comes from Chris. He's asking, does the solution support two-factor authentication?
Awesome,
Yeah, great.
absolutely. And it sure does. And maybe Rotem has some additional insights to add there.
Yeah, definitely. So Access integrates with all IDPs out there. So as long as your IDP contains MFA, Access can support that very same MFA. But even if you wouldn't like to use your own IDP, we have a self-hosted Access IDP that also supports MFA and connects with all the authenticators out there as well with your just email.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, and
Totally.
there was another question from
And we see all
Steve, and
types of
oh yeah,
IDPs
go ahead.
used. I was
Yeah, I
just
was
going to
just
say
gonna.
Okta, Azure AD, Pingfetter, all these are, yeah,
Great.
after
Yeah,
each
there
other.
was just a follow-up question from Steve was, are there any limitations in connecting MFA with on-premises legacy applications? And it sounds like you were kind of getting into that as well.
Definitely. A lot of our customers and prospects have connected their IDFS, for instance, to Access, and that works perfectly fine.
Okay. All right, super. Next question, is the contextual access maintained by Access self-updating, or is the administrator required to define parameters and update as necessary?
So the access policy takes under consideration what is configured and the user circumstances. Now, as long as the policy wasn't the policy rules, set of policy rules wasn't changed, access will be continuously enforcing all user sessions with that very same one policy. And if anything will change in the user context, access will and that will make the session no longer adhere to the policy. Access will automatically terminate the session and block the user from accessing. This happens automatically behind the scenes without the admins need to do anything. If the admin, while the user is connected, will change the policy, and that will make the user session that used to be legit up until this change that was pushed no longer legit. So again, because the session won't longer adhere to the policy configuration, it will be terminated. So it happens behind the scenes continuously. You don't need to worry about that. Just make sure that your policy is up to date, and Access will do the rest.
Okay, nice. Next question they're asking is about SIM. Am I able to receive SIM logs from the Access Cloud instance to monitor for attacks on my infrastructure via Access? Sorry, similar to traditional firewall.
Yeah, definitely. So all of the activity logs that we are gathering are streamed continuously and live to your SIM. We are support API integration as well as syslog integration, so you can pretty much select the method that you would like to stream the logs to, and it happens live. So if you'll be connecting, if your SOC analyst will be managing an analysis and playbooks on top of it, the data that is streamed to your SIM, you can definitely count on Access data to be there live and available to everything that actually you'd like to do. Everything is streamed, and again, just because we're the only ones that are doing this, that gives the admins this layer 7 visibility of what the users are actually doing in the applications, and not only with logs that are streamed for firewall, you mainly get the header of the session, so you'll know what IP the user was connecting from and what IP they were trying to get to. With Access, you get much more, and everything is streamed live to your SIM.
Okay, super. Next question is about pricing. What's the Access pricing model? Is it per device or per user or enterprise wide? How do you guys handle that?
Great, great question. So we're subscription service. We charge per user per year. And, we sell in 1 year or 3-year increments as well. So we're not charging on a per device perspective. We're not charging based on bandwidth. So it makes things a little bit easier on our customer side.
Okay, great. Next question comes from Paul, who's asking, how granular is the event or alert reporting offered through the Access Security platform? Is there consistent reporting experience across SIM solutions, or do you recommend preferred SIMs? So it's a couple of questions in there, but hopefully you guys can unpack
So
them.
Tim, you want to take that one?
Yeah, definitely. So Access, again, we stream the logs all the time, continuously to your SIM. So you can either select to view the reports in your SIM if you prefer. And we don't have, it's not like that we did, as different integrations with Syslog or with Splunk's RPI. So we support everything and we stream the very same logs. We of course make sure to parse them if that's an API integration with a SIM like Splunk, for instance. So we'll be parsing the logs and make sure that they will get properly to your SIM. But we also have our in-house, and this is actually what you're seeing on the screen right now. We have our own in-house analytic and dashboards because sometimes we feel like it's easier for admins to see everything in one place, to configure your policy and then go to the other tab and see what the users were doing. But it's based on the same data. And we have great solution architects that helped a great amount of our customers to also configure their own dashboards in their SIM for customers who prefer to do so. But I think that this is yet again the Access granular magic. It's all configurable, and you can just decide what's the method that is preferred for your organization.
Okay, super. Next question: Do I still need to use VDI or virtual desktop for partners?
This is a really good question, right? Because VDI, I would say, is used for maybe like 5 to 6 key use cases. So I'm always hesitant to say, all right, you don't need any VDI at all. But the reality is, if you're looking to connect third parties, the challenges you're trying to solve are keeping them off the network and granularity in the form of segmentation, right? So absolutely, if you're looking for third-party access from a remote perspective, and whether it's an agentless browser-based RDP session or whatever it is, you can absolutely use this as an alternative to VDI. The big benefits you're going to get there is, again, we're decoupling application access from network access to the users never placed onto the network. Sometimes the challenge with VDI is you have to often poke holes in your firewall because it's basically a /22 network that's relatively flat. So you have to provide access to VDI resources that are essentially pooled assets, which means that the user can directly access that pool of shared resources, but you have this constant kind of Swiss cheese of holes in your firewalls, Cisco, PAN, whatever it might be. So again, the notion here is specific access to a dedicated resource. You could even do things like record the session that a third party is going through when they're connecting to some kind of RDP application or RDP server. You can actually record that within the environment and watch it later to determine exactly what that individual access. So again, more granularity, more visibility, and of course, this notion of zero trust is extremely important there.
Okay, great. Another question, ransomware is obviously top of mind for a lot of people. Person's asking, is Access capable of preventing ransomware from entering my private network?
This is a great question, and I probably should included a slide on what that looks like, because if you think about the kind of the attack framework of a ransomware, there's typically some kind of recon. There's a phishing email that maybe goes out, or a VPN server that's exposed. There's a macro that's out there. The malware is installed. Domain controller takes over. The credentials are stolen. The lateral movement data is stolen, right? And then there's the ransom demand itself. So when you think about the architecture and what we've designed here with an Access, there's really kind of 3 areas you want to think through. One is minimizing exposure. So we're able to help you eliminate the attack surface, again, for the reasons we talked about. We're not allowing, let's say, a private application to be exposed to the open internet, so it's not discoverable. The second piece of the minimizing exposure piece is we're doing the inline inspection of that data, right? So we're doing the inspection for visibility, determining the user activity as well. And we're even going to get even more kind of granular in terms of the threat detection and response capabilities of the platform itself. So that's the minimizing exposure piece. The second part is the reducing the actual lateral movement. And we talk about this quite a bit, right? We're not doing network segmentation. So it's not internal firewalls where you're doing in a source IP destination firewalls and hundreds of lines of rules. We're doing app level segmentation. So least privilege access is a really important part of that. So being able to securely connect a specific authorized user only to the specific app without access to the network, without the need for ACLs. Second piece, and we're doing this right now for HTTP and HTTPS servers, is the server-to-server segmentation. So least privilege access between server-to-server communications help protect networks from ransomware. In the future, we'll have the ability to do some other components as well. Also, SWG protects users from malware, so they can't harm endpoints as well, right? So the SWG capability that we'll be introducing into our platform is another big piece as well. I guess you could say that fits into the minimize exposure. But again, the three buckets: minimize exposure, reduce lateral movement. The third one is preventing data loss. So the content inspection, we can do things like have controls over disabling download, disabling copy and paste, policies for both users and servers. There's the ability to help kind of root out malicious activity where, since we're sitting in line, we can tell you what files were downloaded, what protocols were used, what commands were even used as well. Rotem, anything else you would add to the ransomware piece?
Yeah, I think that also with our device posture capabilities, we can also identify if an endpoint was indeed infected. So we can definitely identify that and let the admins know. So with this full protection of both the applications and the user's endpoint, so you can trust Access that you'll be 100% protected from malwares.
Yeah, that's a
That's great.
phenomenal question, and one that we should kind of just hit on. Yep.
Yeah. No, that's a really it's interesting how many layers you guys have on the ransomware defense side. Thanks for clarifying that. Um, let's see, probably got time for another one or two here. This one, does browser-based RDP require guacamole integration?
So you don't need to worry
That's another good
about
question. So I think,
yeah, go ahead, Chris.
oh, sorry, I think there's a delay on it. I'm blaming myself here. Sorry. Go ahead, Rotem. Sorry.
Yeah, so Access takes care of it all, so you don't need to worry about having Guac installed on your environment. We have it integrated within our platform so that your users can agentlessly, without the need to install anything, just leverage the great Guac capabilities and to connect to RDP using the web, using your web browser.
Okay, super. Well, you guys have been on the hot seat here for a little while. Really appreciate you taking all of these questions and all the insights and the answers here. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, this was great. I mean, the big takeaway here is when we talk about zero trust, it's really difficult to sometimes understand what are the right technologies to start out with, right? So we often recommend start with some kind of ZTNA solution, right? The journey to secure service edge is it's a journey. So starting with replacing your VPN or your VDI with for third parties, maybe looking at Agentless, and then moving into agent-based, then looking at your employees. So it's a very kind of structured process, and we're happy to work you through that journey. But it's a really exciting space. Third parties are one of the biggest entry points of risk and of threats that we're seeing in our, just the market itself. So I'm glad that you're all here and really appreciate y'all taking the time to hear us out and listen to hopefully how this can be valuable for each one of your enterprises as well.
Great.
Tim, any
Well,
last thoughts?
yeah, Rotem, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the only note is that we've been talking a lot about customizability, and the granularity for admins to grant access to their users. And I just wanted to emphasize that for Access, this is not a feature; it's really our way of life. We do see our product and the ability for admins to create granular policies a key thing in our product philosophy. So this is not just a feature. This is something that would allow us to discuss not only those three great use cases we've been reviewing today, but as much use cases as you like, just because you can just create the policies that will adhere to your business needs. And this is really what's great about the product, to my opinion.
Super. Hey, well, thanks a lot, Rotem and Chris. Great presentation. Really appreciate this update on access security and all these issues with access and helping companies get that under control. And just a quick reminder to the audience, since we're about to wrap up, if you do want to check out that 14-day free trial, there's a link there in your handouts. And it's at the bottom of the screen as well, accesssecurity.com/free-trial. Just want to note that since we're about to wrap up, and the link will disappear. And before we do finish today, we have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. The winner of that gift card is Rommel Regalado from California. So congratulations to Rommel. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Chris and Rotem again for putting together this really informative presentation and for all of those insights in the Q&A. This was really great. I'd also like to thank Access Security for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd really like to thank everybody for attending and for all your great questions today. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.